Hi everyone, in this video we will learn about CSS Box Model. The CSS Box Model is one of the most fundamental part of CSS, and so you really need to understand it in order to learn CSS, and so that is exactly what we will do in this video. Now what exactly is the CSS Box Model? Well, the box model defines how elements are displayed on a web page and how they are sized. So in this box model, each and every element on a web page can be seen as a rectangular box, and each of these boxes can have content, a border, and a space inside and outside of it. So let's define all of the pieces of the box model one by one. When it comes to the content within an element, it can take various forms such as text, images, tables, videos, or any other type of media that is specified. Using CSS properties, we can specify both the height and the width of the content area, which we already learned in previous lectures. Next, we can define a border that goes all around the element. By the way, it's important to note that this border is technically still considered part of the element. And now the next ingredient of the box model is the padding. So padding is basically invisible white space that we can create around the element's content. So between the content and the border. You can see that nicely in this diagram, and just like the border, the padding is also still inside of the element. So essentially padding is empty space that we can create inside of elements. Then similar to padding, we also have margin. Now the difference is that margin creates empty space around the element, so outside of the element itself. So in practice, if we use margin in order to create space between elements on our web page. So as you know, for example, we want space between two certain elements. We simply specify the margin property on one of them. So again, padding is empty space that we can add inside of any element, and it will sit between the content itself and the border, which is basically the outermost part of the element. So the content, padding, and border all together are the visible part of the element, and as we can see it on the page. Then around all that, we can add some margin in order to create space between elements. Now what's important to note here is that all of these are actually optional. So we don't have to specify padding or a border or margins. So we can define none of them or some or even all of them. It all depends on how we want our layout to look like. Finally, there is also something called the fill area. And this one can be a bit confusing, but let's try to understand it. So remember that the text content and images are inside the content box. Now the same does not apply for background images or background color of an element. These properties will actually be applied not only to the content area but to the entire fill area, which also includes the padding and the border. So basically, if we apply a background image or color, it will occupy the entire visible part of the element. Now for some people, this can all sound very abstract and hard to imagine in the real world. And so in these situations, it's very useful to think of an analogy in the real world. And one analogy that I personally find very helpful is to imagine a frame on a wall. So in this analogy, the drawing or the image that is the frame is the content area. Then many frames actually have this like kind of white paper between the drawing or the image and the actual frame itself. And so if we bring that back to our box model, then that would of course be the padding, so the space between the content area and the border. And so in this analogy, the frame of course the border, so that makes a lot of sense. Finally, when we hang a picture on the wall using a frame like this, then of course there might be some space between other elements on the wall. or even some other walls on the sides. And so in our box model analogy, that of course would be margin. So it is the space that is outside of the frame and creating space between frames. So for example, there might be another frame somewhere here on the wall, and the space between those frames outside of them is what we call the margin in box model. So hopefully this analogy from the real world helps you bring these concepts back into more abstract world of CSS. Let's quickly learn how the box model actually calculates the exact size of an element based on content, border and padding. To ensure consistent width and height of an element across different browsers, understanding the box model is essential. This model defines how an element dimensions are calculated, including its content, padding, border and margin. By grasping this concept, you can accurately set the width and height of element in a manner that works effectively across various browsers. It's crucial to understand that when you specify the width and height of an element using CSS, you are only setting the dimension of its content area. To determine the total size of the element, you need to consider additional factors such as padding, borders and margins. These elements add extra space around the content area and are important for accurately determining the overall size of an element on a web page. Now here is the calculation. To calculate the total width of an element, you will need to consider various factors. The formula for determining the total element width includes adding up the individual component, width, left padding, left border, right border, left margin and right margin. By summing these values together, you can accurately determine the overall width of the element. To determine the total height of an element, you can follow this calculation method. Total element height is equal to height plus top padding plus bottom padding plus top border plus bottom border plus top margin plus bottom margin, and by adding up these individual components, you can accurately determine the overall vertical space occupied by the element. This comprehensive calculation ensures that all factors contributing to elements' height are taken into account. And there you have it, the CSS box model. It's the foundation of web layout, and mastering it is essential for any web designer. But remember, practice makes perfect. Experiment, play around with your elements and get comfortable with this model. Now that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button to join this exciting web development journey with us. And if you have any questions or suggestions, you can put those in the comment section below. Until next time, keep coding and creating. I will see you in the next video.